Well, Mr. Tyler Hill, how are you? How you been
Uh,
with the whole quarantine thing?
it's crazy, man. I mean, it's been really interesting, like, with my business and loyal and things like that. It's been stressful, scary, all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much uncertainty, but it's been really interesting. Um, Sorry, I was closing my blinds. It's been interesting. At least in our house, there's been so much like peace in our home, and there's been so much like stability almost in a way that I really didn't expect to happen, if I was going to be honest. Like, considering just the fate of my business up in the air and trying to ensure that like my employees have paychecks and rent money and food, like considering how stressful and scary that is, there's been some peace in our home, and that's been a really cool thing and been a big blessing. And yeah, the Lord's just been really near. So it's been like to some degree a pendulum swing, in that like two areas of my life are really different, but it's something that I've just been really thankful for, that it's been different than I thought it would be in a really good
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, because you're really social. Like, are you going to the shop at all, or are you like not
Yeah.
going?
No, I am for sure. So yeah, I'm in there almost every day right now because we're still serving guests to go. Like, we're
Right.
still trying to save the business.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, there's only 1 to 2 of us in there ever at a time, and sometimes that's overkill. Um, so I'm in there a good bit, and we're just taking all the precautionary measures that we can. But yes,
Yeah.
I'm still going in a good little bit.
No, that's wild. It's probably nice to get out of the house a little bit, though.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I like covet my work hours at the church. Like,
I know, man. I get it.
I'm like, Brooke, I gotta go do some stuff. She's like, what do you gotta do? I'm like, I'll see you later. But yeah, bro, we got some
Awesome.
gift cards from Loyal the other day for our volunteers, just because we want to support you guys. And yeah,
Appreciate
this
it.
whole thing is wild. We had a lot of plans and a lot of things we wanted to do.
I
I'm sure you
know.
guys did too. You have a lot of things that are just, it seems like they're on hold, but also you don't know if they'll ever come back.
Yep.
How does that work with Loyal Coffee? Like, you guys just kind of, you can't really make any future plans.
Yeah.
Do you have any like things in mind that you think you want to do?
Yeah. I mean, you just don't know. I mean, like,
Yeah.
on one level, I think everybody's going to want to come back and go out and go to coffee shops and stuff again.
Yeah.
But I also am not convinced that like society as we knew it is going to be the same. Like,
Yeah.
I think people are going to have legitimate PTSD about this. Like, I think they're going to be scared to hug each other and shake hands and sit in coffee shops. Like, I think some people will truly struggle with that. Um, I think people's fear about germs and things, like, I think stuff like that could really happen. And I think people also are learning what's like in a beautiful way, even if this isn't healthy necessarily for a coffee company, but
Mm.
people are also learning what they do and don't need in a beautiful way. I think like people are reevaluating their budgets, and they're reevaluating their priorities. They're reevaluating, like I was talking to a guy who's building a gym in his garage, and he was like, I never in my life considered that I didn't need to pay to go to the gym in my life. But he's like, I can do it in my garage,
Yeah.
everything that I need. And he's like, I just never even thought of that, And so I think things like
Yeah.
so many things, like to some degree, I think life will look different. So I don't even know, so I don't even know what we can plan for, just because
Right.
I, you know, we could be 10 times more busy because everybody needs to go out, which I
Right.
think inherently, right, people want to go out, but at the same time, I think it will look different. So I don't know, man. It'll be interesting. So I mean, honestly, bro, we're just in like survival mode. We're
Yeah.
just trying to survive, and that's honestly the only goal. And then we'll deal with all the other stuff when it comes.
Yeah.
But
No, yeah, we were planning like a big conference for June.
yeah,
I was like talking to people, and you were on that list, and a couple other people that I really am inspired by. I don't know what to do. Like, should we promote it? Should we keep it? Like, it's on the website, but no one really looks at the church website. Like,
totally.
maybe once a year you look at it. But yeah, so there's this weird feeling of like, what do I do right now? How do I work well? That's kind of why we wanted to have you kind of do this Zoom call interview.
Yep.
Because when I worked for you at Loyal, and just kind of talking to you through these last like 6-7 months,
Yep.
I've really seen you as someone who's very intentional kind of in every area of your life, even to to the degree of the values at Loyal Coffee, and then to you just as a regular human being.
Sure.
Those things even blend together. And so
Yep.
I wanted to talk about intensity or intentionality in isolation.
Yeah.
But I wanted to first kind of ask, like, what do you do on like a regular day, like with your family and on your own to kind of keep yourself motivated? Because I know you're very like go get it kind of guy. How do you kind of keep that going?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, I think in terms of, I think one of the keys to me, and I think it's really important, you know, as our seasons in our life changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
The things that we put our energy towards should change, right? So the way that I've operated, say, you know, now versus before I had a kid is radically different.
Yeah.
And the way that I've operated, you know, 5 years into marriage versus one is not the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that's really interesting, and I didn't expect there to be so much change, but even after my mom passed away last year, like the way that I work and disciplines that I have has also changed even since that. And I think one of the things that I think is like harmful to folks who are trying to stay motivated and are trying to work hard is we think about the time where we were the most efficient, the time where we were totally crushing it.
Mm-hmm.
And we always try to marry ourselves to that or hold on to that. But the reality is like our life circumstances change often. And I think as a result, it's important that we change, you know, accordingly as our life changes, our lifestyles, as our circumstances change. It's important that our expectations of ourselves change. It's important that, you know, so I think for me, you know, my season right now looks really different than it did 4 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that for one is really important. On the same token, I think there's a major reality of the people who I think are the most successful, who are able to stay on the right track, are able to continue and to be focused. Those people also are really confident in what they're about. And this could be a coffee company. This could be Amazon. You know, this could be, you know, just me as a human or the Hill family unit. You know, that there needs to be some core values that drive everything you do.
Yeah.
So while the ways in which you might work towards achieving those core values might change depending on your circumstances, the foundational core needs to stay the same. And so whether that's, you know, just your own identity, you know, whether that's, you know, just what your, you know, the Serio family, you know, 3 family values or whatever, like you still need those core foundations that will serve as the compass through which you can walk towards the goals. So again, the core things needs to stay the same no matter what those seasons is, but the ways in which you go about achieving those things could look really different. Here's a small, real quick example.
Yeah.
You know, our family, you know, one of our family core values is hospitality. And that translates obviously into my business and things like this. About 2 years ago, my family decided we were going to pay off all of our debt in 1 year. So we paid off $25,000 of debt in 1 year.
That's crazy.
Now, because we didn't have money to go out, we didn't have a lot of excess money to host people, the ways in which we engaged in hospitality looked radically different than they do, say, you know, when we were all done with that. When we were done paying off our debt, we could make fancy cocktails and order out pizza and do things like that. But that wasn't allowed because we weren't spending money on anything extra. But that didn't mean we weren't still hosting people. We just had water instead. It didn't mean we weren't still going on walks. We just weren't having meals. The core values still have to stay the same, but the ways in which you achieve those core values need to change depending on the circumstance. So my point is I'm hesitant to just say, this is what I do, because I don't want to tempt you to try to do just like me. And I don't want to lock us into trying to do the same thing forever, because it should change and be evolving over time.
Yeah. So basically you would say that right now, like your core values have to stay the same, but how you approach them has to change in a way.
Over the course of our life.
Right. Yeah.
Things change. And so the ways in which we approach and try to find things, the only time I think the ways in which we approach our core values, when they change, is maybe as our own identity and core values might change. This is what it really gets down to, bro. is it really gets down to our identity. And I think, our core values are so shaped by how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the way God perceives us.
Right.
You know, do we believe that we're beloved? When we believe that we're beloved, that God looks on us with a belovedness, that impacts our core identity and who we are.
Mm.
When we don't feel like we're beloved, the ways in which we live out our lifestyle is trying to fill that gap.
Mm.
We're trying to buy things to solidify. We're trying to change our outward appearance. We're trying to, impress other people, whether it's a boss or a leader or a pastor or a boy or a girl. We're trying to, fill that void because we don't believe we're lovely. So we need a relationship to fill that, or we need a job or something to fulfill that. And so when your core identity is skewed, the ways in which you approach that core identity is also probably unhealthy. So it all starts with having a really clear, beautiful core identity. And that really starts with, how do we perceive ourselves and how do we perceive that God perceives us? So when you can work to get to a place where your core identity is in a healthy place, when you say, I know that I'm beloved, I know that I'm worthy, I know that I'm worth it, I know I'm not an accident, I know my life has purpose, then the things that you do with your job, the things you do with your money, the things you do with your day-to-day lifestyle will filter through that, and those will be healthy practices. But when your core identity is broken, the practices that you execute every day will also be broken. So it all starts with your identity. It all starts with how you perceive yourself and how you perceive God perceives you. A.W. Tozer says, the most important thing about you is what you think about when you first think about God.
Right.
So when you think about God and you say, oh, he's so judgmental, he's just an asshole like my dad was, or something like that.
Yeah.
That's going to impact everything in your heart. You're going to live a life filtered through a lens of judgment and a broken fatherhood, which in case will impact everything you do, all your relationships, all your work. So it all starts with your identity and knowing that, and that's what will ultimately impact the way in which you live your life.
Yeah. No, that's really good. One thing that we always say at home, and we've had people, write our Instagram and ask questions about certain beliefs and all these types of things. Are these people allowed, or what do you think about this?
Sure.
When you're talking on this subject just now, it made me think, like, one thing that we always say is that we're more focused on the heart than we are the habit.
Yeah.
Like, you can deal with any sin, you can do this or that or whatever you think, like keeps you separated, but really we just want to speak to your heart. And I think Jesus at the same time, right now he cares less about what we're doing and more about like who we believe that he is, like just exactly what you said, and that's so good, that reminder, because for someone like me, I'll go to the Enneagram now, of course, because I'm
Awesome.
not the kind of guy, I guess, but
Love
I'm a
it.
7, Brooke is a 3, and so
Okay.
together all we do is just work, and we go and do things, and so right now, I mean, this is really hard for us. We're
Mm-hmm.
both, in the 90% extroverted, that much of extroverted in us. There's like 2% introverted, so we need like 4 minutes a day and then we're fine, or whatever. 10 minutes a month and we're good to go, And so we're trying to find out, like, how can we be, intentional right now to keep ourselves, healthy in a way, because like Brooke is my best friend, and, my boys are some of my best friends. Like, they're almost better than most adults I know.
Yes.
But it's like at some point I got to do something like other than just like take care of us. Like, there's something more. There's more than just surviving. There's this part of like thriving. Like, how do we do that? How would you speak to that? Like, how can we thrive in this moment? Like, be intentional. Like, let's say we know God loves us. We're good on that end, but yet we feel like, there's more than just like sitting around and maybe watching, Netflix, and watching a message for 10 minutes, getting bored, turning it off, and then pretending to clean and heating up bagel bites in the microwave. Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah. Isolation, what we're experiencing right now, to whatever degree, it forces other things to stay away.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Our lives have been distilled. We're distilling many things away. Even for people like I'm working more than most,
Right.
so much of my life, like I have less meetings, I have less, so many things. So much of our lives have been distilled. To one degree or another, all of us, Jordan, are having to sit with ourselves for maybe the first time in years, maybe the first time ever.
Yeah.
We're having to really sit with ourselves. And I think the way that we are responding, first and foremost, to the isolation, the opportunity to sit with ourselves, the way we're responding says a lot about us. And it says a lot about who we are. So I think one of the first things I'd like to suggest is that when you or any of the people at home are sitting in these scenarios where there's some tension and there's some friction, one of the things you can do to be intentional is to be intentional to try and identify where are the friction points in my life. Because you're sitting with yourself now, you're getting some chances to listen to your own voice, maybe even to listen to the voice of God.
Yeah.
But regardless, things are more quiet, and there's opportunity to listen that you've never had before.
Right.
And maybe it's a voice, but probably it's not a voice. Probably it's a little bit of stress. Probably it's a little bit of boredom. Probably it's a little bit of fear. A lot of the ways God speaks, I believe, is through our feelings. What do you feel when this happens or that happens, and what bubbles up and rises up inside of you? So a lot of things have been stripped away, in which case it's been more quiet. And when it's more quiet, there's more opportunities to hear things. And so first and foremost, I'd like to suggest that this is an opportunity for you to listen. It's an opportunity for you to listen to yourself, listen to the points of tension. What are you nervous about right now? What are you scared about? What brings you life in this season? Listen to yourself, because you might not get this chance again for your entire life to be this quiet.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing, before you ever want to take action on anything, before you want to start making plans, before you want to start growing, you need to take time to pause and to listen. If you read about any of the sages in the world, like I've read a couple books, and this has been entirely by accident, but this theme has just been coming up in my life, in about 6 or 7 of the books I've already read this year. Mother Teresa says this, Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama, Gandhi. Like, I've read some books about all of these folks. Martin Luther talked about this as well, how important silence is in their life. Like, Archbishop Desmond Tutu spends an hour of silence every day in the morning. Before he prays for other people, before he goes out and does his justice work, he's quiet and he just listens. I think the problem is that so often we jump to try and do a lot of things and make a lot of plans and accomplish a lot of stuff without taking the time to sit and listen.
Yeah.
And I think it's partially a lot of the reason why our identities are so often misunderstood. We haven't even taken the time to listen to God, to ask him what he thinks about us.
Yeah.
We've just tried to work to try and figure it out, even by reading books or listening to sermons. So my first call would be silent and learn to befriend silence. Learn to befriend the quiet.
Yeah.
Maybe even learn to normalize boredom to some degree. Isn't it interesting that we are so frustrated that we're not accomplishing things, when so often in the churches and so often in sermons and so often in scriptures we say, okay, it's not about what you do, like God already loves you.
Yeah.
And yet now we're panicking because we're not doing stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe now is the first time ever that we can actually put into practice this reality of saying, you know what, God loves me no matter what I do or don't do, because most of us aren't doing much right now.
Yeah.
So can we find ourselves in a place where we can truly believe our belovedness, that, man, God loves me, Jesus loves me, even when I'm not accomplishing things? We've
Right.
made boredom an enemy. Maybe we need to normalize it and say, you know what, even if I am just going on a walk, like, this can be fulfilling, this can have purpose, this can have value. because that's the truth. There
Yeah.
is sacredness in just a walk.
Yeah.
There is sacredness in just being quiet. And so I think normalizing some of those things can help us understand the gospel, can help us know Jesus a little bit better. And so I think, if anything, I want us to be cautious, not to try and fill our time, but to even say, where's the Lord in this little bit of boredom, in this little bit of silence, and where can I listen? And I'd like to suggest that if you listen, if you can learn to lean into the silence, you're going to hear the Lord. And if you hear the Lord, you'll know what to do and how to make the most of it.
Yeah.
So I could sit here and I could tell you to make a bunch of stuff up to fill up your time and be intentional with it.
Yeah.
But now more than ever, you can be silent and hear from the Lord better than in any other season in your life. And I think that's worth it more than knowing what to do.
Yeah. No, that's really good. It's like, I think someone like me, I sometimes fall into like purpose being so much about, using my hands and feet. And, Pastor Joseph Winger, who's my pastor, my mentor, know him as well. But
Yep.
he talks about there's people that are hands people, heart people, and then there's head people. And Brooke and I both are hands people. We love to make and build and create moments and momentum.
Yeah.
And there's people who, are all heart people, and they love resting and getting deep, and like, they're into breaking bread together. And there's head people who normally, they know everything about what you need to know. And those people kind of annoy me most of the time. Oh, it's cool that you know that, but I've never seen you do it. And then they're like, well, you don't know anything and you're rushing too much. And then there's this weird like dynamic of coming together, but I think what you're saying is so good that, you can't really do anything until you hear the word of the Lord, like tell you where to go. Because again, like if we were just to make up our own way, we would all be so lost.
Yeah.
We don't know, we're created to walk with God, not, ahead of him. And so
we get so consumed with doing things for him that we forget to do things with him.
Right. Yes.
And and so the temptation is still going to be to do things for him.
Yeah.
Even now. And it's like, but I'd like to suggest, how much in the past have we been trying to do things for God still, even when our lives were really busy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so now more than ever is a time to recalibrate and a time to learn to listen. Now, here's something I would like to suggest in terms of things to do.
Please.
And this is something that my family does. And this is a practice of the Hill family, but has really been a practice of believers for thousands of years. This is called the rule of life. And we actually take time every year to set our rule of life. And so, different monks do this, and different, monasteries and church groups and groups of believers have different versions of this all the time. And a rule of life is really just your set of goals and set of purpose of how you're going to intentionally live out your life. And so, but again, what's interesting is our rule of life now looks very different because of the circumstances in the season. So part of our rule of life is to have somebody over for dinner once a week. We can't do that. So obviously our rule of life has changed, but there are things in our rule of life, that have stayed the same, like silence. We go on walks all by ourselves once a week. We plan that. That's an intentional thing. Tyler's going to go on his walk by himself. No podcast, no music, whatever. Chelsea will also do that. And we put it in the calendar. That's part of our rule of life.
Wow.
We want to go on a certain retreat every year. We'll go on. That's part of our rule of life. My goal is to read 50 books this year. That's part of my rule of life. And so I've put it in my schedule to read 50 books, and so, roughly about a book a week with, 52 weeks. And so I got to get a little bit ahead. But that's part of my rule of life. And there's been some intentionality behind that. But again, that starts by listening first. Yeah. You don't just do that to fill it up. You do that to listen. If you look, Jesus also had a rule of life. He didn't just wing it when he said, I'm going to go pray in silence, when I'm going to go get away. He didn't just wing it when he, there was, I think, significantly more intentionality into the ways in which he lived his life every day. And so if you've never lived a rule of life, now might be a good time. A weekly fast might be a good one. In fact, there's a church in Oregon called Bridgetown,
Oh yeah.
and they've been posting a lot about rule of life, and they're starting to like teach their people about it in this season.
Yeah.
And so that's really cool. They have some Instagrams. There's also a church called in Portland, also called Van City Church.
Okay.
And they have a sermon series about a rule of life that they did sometime in the last year that also could be really helpful. So I'm not suggesting we just get quiet and wing it. I think there is some intentionality behind the rhythms of our life, but what I am suggesting is that we need to not just jump into it and fill it. That's our Western vision to say, okay, I'm just got to fill my time.
Right.
And that's not healthy or helpful.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. I love Bridgetown Church. Some of
Yeah.
the biggest things in my life came from the podcast, This Cultural Moment. Like I listen to it all.
Cool.
I have a texting group with two of my friends who we send like quotes from John Mark Comer and stuff. We're like, bro, listen to this. I'm like, yo, what's your rule of life? I texted my friend the other day. He said, that's personal, bro. Then it responds, I'm not sure. He's not going to tell me. But I love that idea, you know, because it's like, again, there's so much beauty in isolation and sitting and listening. But it has, like, again, it's like all things come in a balance.
Yes.
So like, you can't just be a listener. It's like you can't just be a hearer of the word. You have to be a doer of the word at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do until you hear. So there's an order. You know, I think
agree.
one thing that I've noticed with a lot of people that come into our church and even friends I have and me myself sometimes is like our rule of life is so unsteady where it's like I'm not really sure what I'm believing right now in this moment. I'm not really sure like what I'm here for. Like people come and they serve at the church and it's amazing. But then it's like after, you know, the hype wears down, it's like, well, I don't know why I'm here. And then they just kind of fade out into the background. You know, we're very much like, you know, no spectators, all participants. Like, let's get up, let's go into together. Like we're all ministers. We're all a part of the team. So I think right now it's really easy to just kind of fade out again. And like, I have no rule of life. I have no purpose right now. I'm just going to wait until everything gets back to normal to be normal, you know? And it's like, we can come out of this thing worse, the same, or better.
Yep.
You know, and I think someone like me thinks better is, you know, I'm more productive, but that's not necessarily even the case. Like Jesus wasn't really that productive in terms of what I would probably think is a productive lifestyle.
Sure.
But how would you speak on kind of flipping it a little bit now, but creativity? Like we have a lot of photographers and videographers and baristas and people that go to home that are more on the creative side. That's why I think it's called weird so much, because we all have a weird style and whatever, but I like it. How do you think like you keep inspiration in that sense? You know, because for me, like I get inspired by conversations with people.
Sure.
Even now, there's a little spark in me of inspiration. But when you run out of podcasts to listen to, like, how do you get inspired by God? Like, you know, you're listening and it's like, you know, not as much as you're used to. And how would you speak on that just for a moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
You have all the answers, I assume. So
I love that. I love the idea of creativity. I don't have all the answers. I think what's so interesting is that so many creatives often will have writer's block or a creative block anyways.
Yes.
Regardless of seasons like this, when society is buzzing and New York City is full, those things still well up inside of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really a really interesting thing. So I think for me, I think what's important is that, and maybe this has to do with creativity, maybe this has to do with so many other things, is again, I want us to be cautious not to respond so much as an answer to COVID and what's happening. And more so, I want us to be a people, and I think the Lord wants us to be a people that's responding to Him.
Yeah.
And so in terms of creativity, Lord, who are you making me? Lord, what do you want me to communicate? Lord, like that question should exist in any season, not necessarily as a result of COVID or if COVID doesn't exist, right?
Right.
I think what's interesting is that I think, we could still have some inspiration, as a result of this, like, obviously like tapping into loneliness and boredom and things like this. And we could create art inspired by that in the same way that we could about busyness and things like that.
Yeah.
But again, when we're isolated, we've been talking about isolation today, it forces other things out and it puts us in a place where we're all by ourselves without other distractions and other things to bring us down, which forces ourselves to truly identify who we are, because we're less distracted. There's less things around us to pull us in one direction or another. And so what I say is this is a gorgeous opportunity for you to identify who are you creatively. Like, what is the thing that really brings you life? What is the thing that you really want to communicate, that you feel like God really wants you to communicate? Sometimes like maybe we call it inspiration and maybe it's copycatting, but there's always something to soak up from our friends. Like, and I think that's radically beautiful. I think it's okay to borrow. There's that awesome book called Steal Like an Artist. Like, that's super real. But also some of the best artists are the ones that have finally identified who they are and what they're about. And so perhaps this is the time for you to look at your body of work up to this point and say, okay, what if this is honest? What if this is authentic? Yeah. What if this is who I am? What if this is what God wants me to be? And maybe it's time for you to zero in and say, okay, this is my style. This is my message. This is what it is, because you're less distracted about the other things around you. Yeah. So maybe it's less about being inspired by other things because they might not exist, and saying, okay, like maybe it's time for me to write, what is my identity as an artist? Yeah. I think what's interesting is when you look at a lot of artists who are really successful, it's because a lot of times they found their niche and they know like what they're about. And some, you might say, wow, they make the same thing all the time. Like, this piece looks the same as that piece. It looks the same as that piece. Yeah. I'd like to suggest that they've found who they are and they're confident in it and they know, and then they run with it. And that's why it's excellent. So maybe for you, this is that time to do that. And maybe it's less about trying to find something new and more about distilling who God wants you to be.
Right. Yeah. No, that's really, really good. Yeah. One thing that you made me kind of think about is that another thing that we mention a lot at home is like, inspiration doesn't necessarily come from the outside. It comes from the inside. Like the power of God, the presence of God, the love of Jesus doesn't really come from like the lights and smoke and the right people and all that. It comes from the inside of you. It has to come in and then out, I think sometimes we go to church and we go to museums and we go to other places and experience good moments, but they never build momentum, right? Like, it's just a moment that we were in and we wish we could get back to that moment. And as a creative person and as someone who leads a creative team, and we have a whole bunch of people who help us with graphics and videos and all this really fun stuff, it's like, I'll send a song to the team. I'm like, yo, this song inspires me. Like, let's do something with it. And they're like, well, what's the vision for it? I'm like, I don't have vision. It just gave me chills. And that's kind of a moment. That's not necessarily going to build momentum, for someone to experience something, because creativity can speak volumes about who God is and who you are. But I think that's so good that right now we're trying to figure out, or we will figure out, like who am I when it's just me and God, no other influence.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of creativity. Yeah, that's what we want to see.
And that's where, whether it's in creativity or not, why so many people who truly know the Lord, like, find the people who you really want to be, the dads that you really want to be like, and they have to be over 60. The dads you want to be like, the husbands and wives you want to be like, the women of God, like you ask any of them and they've been silent with God, just them and God, without those other distractions, because then it's only you. And that's what I'm saying about this isolation is, this is the time to do it. Yeah. We're so scared. Like so many of us are scared of silence, Jordan. We're so scared of isolation. And that's why this time is miserable for so many people, because I think we don't really know who we are. And we're scared to actually look at ourselves in the mirror and have that conversation.
Yeah.
And just like you're saying, when we can, but here's the thing is, God loves us so much, and he sees us as his beloved. We're so beloved. And if we could just get to that place and actually be alone with God and actually see our belovedness, it's not that scary. But we don't believe we're beloved.
Right.
We don't believe that we're lovely. We don't believe that we're beautiful, mostly because we've been so distracted by all the shit in the world that it's distracted us from our own belovedness. And so then we're scared to look in the mirror because we think we're going to see what we think about ourselves. But when we can actually get alone and look at ourselves in the mirror and actually just ask God without any other things around, we'll actually see it. But we're scared because we believe so many false things about ourselves because we've been so distracted by the world. So we have to find that silence. Yeah. It's what comes in on the inside. It is that our true identity. And when we can truly get to this place where we know what God thinks about us, because we've been alone and we're not distracted by the world around us, it changes everything. All of a sudden, when we know that God cares for us, we're not scared where our next paycheck is going to come from, because we know that even because if the sparrows aren't nervous, why should we be?
Exactly.
But we will only be in that place if we can get to a place where we know what God thinks of us.
Yeah.
But when we're alone, and we're alone with ourselves, we see all the crap and we're scared to go there. And so we don't, and we ignore it, and then we just watch Netflix.
Right. It's more entertainment.
We've got to get to this aloneness. This is the time to be alone. We must befriend silence. We must normalize boredom. Yeah. Your intimacy with Jesus is dependent on that. And now more than ever is a time for us to solidify that in our rule of life, so that when this is over and we go out, we can still befriend silence, even when the world gets more noisy.
Yeah. No, that's so good. That kind of speaks on the idea of, like, you know, after this is over, yes, like, you'll come out of it better because you learned something you didn't have before. You yes. can carry this with you. You know, and I don't think, I know that the Lord didn't cause this virus. God is not, you know, yeah. hurting people just so I spend more time with my kids, but he does redeem all things. So if we're sitting alone in our apartment and we don't like who we are when we're alone, it doesn't matter. God loves you yes. wherever you are, how you are. And that's what I kind of was preaching last night for our Easter, Thursday Easter service. Like, yeah, I'm learning this, you know, every day. Just like, again, it doesn't matter. Like, I told Brooke the other day, I was kind of upset because I felt like I wasted a whole work day. I made a video and it was garbage, so I deleted it. And then I was like, oh, it doesn't work. And Brooke's like, you should just be thankful that you have a job right now. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's right. Like, God loves me. He's providing for us. And yep. you know, I had a day where I didn't do a lot of work, and then one day I do a lot of work. Like, why is my happiness so dependent on that?
Yes.
You know, and I think there's a lot of immature areas of my heart in that sense, I think. But, you know, I'm really glad that you're on here, because I think you're one of the people that inspires me to work hard, but also, like, you love just as much as you work. And I think you receive as much as you give. And there's a lot of people out there who are, you know, trying either so hard to give and they don't have anything incoming, you know, to give out. Or there's people who are trying to take so much and they're getting so spiritually fat and filled and they can't move. They're, you know, they're sitting on their couch. They can't even get up, you know, spiritually. I want to be someone who can receive and just continue to give, but I have to receive in order to give. And so if you're creative, or really if you're anyone, you know, you work at Loyal Coffee or you work for Waste Management, it's the same thing. Like, you're receiving in order to give. And just to kind of finish it up here in just a minute, I have a couple more questions. But I wanted to ask, like, I've had a lot of conversations with people who are currently in this moment kind of dealing with anxiety. It's almost like a different type of anxiety. It's like, I mean, even for me, I deal with it sometimes too. It seems like it comes up and down in waves. And it's Brooke, you know, she's pregnant, so she's already, you know, there's something trapped inside of her. Now she feels trapped inside a house, and the playgrounds are shut down and all this stuff. And we have 2 boys who are crazy. And so anxiety kind of comes in, and it's like an anxiety that, you know, it's not even within your own self. It's almost, you know, being put on you from the outside. I kind of stopped looking at CNN so much because I was getting overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But how would you speak on anxiety? Like,
Yeah.
everyone just says, oh, just pray or just worship. And it's like, bro, it's not working. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I pray and it helps. And I know that God is with me, but is there anything that you would say in terms of like my anxiety? It's not leaving. I don't want to live anxiously because like, I don't want my situation to change my spirit so much. Do you have any thoughts on that, or how have you dealt
Yeah.
with
Yeah. I think first of all, anxiety is so real, and I'm so sorry to whoever's watching this and listening. Uh, like it's awful, and anxiety can crush you, and I can sympathize and empathize. I mean, I've gone through a ton, and I've had major seasons of anxiety. And Jordan, you said you did as well, and I
it?
appreciate your willingness to say that and share that, and I implore you to continue to communicate that to your people, because we're all experiencing it and we all feel it, and it's very real, and it sucks. And so I think first of all, just to sit there and recognize that is important, um, and to just really know that you are in the majority. If you're feeling anxiety, you're not in the minority. You're not alone. You're not messed up because of that. Most everybody feels that.
Yeah.
And I think there's an aspect of like there's the reality of experiencing anxiety, okay? And then there's what do we do with it, and what do we think about ourselves? How do I identify with that anxiety? And a lot of times when someone feels anxiety, they say, okay, they feel the anxiety, which is real, valid. And then they say, I'm so messed up, which isn't real or valid.
Yeah.
Why am I worse than everybody else? I am so weak. I am so unimportant. I am so invaluable. In their response to the anxiety, in response to their feelings, those things aren't real. The responses that we often give our anxiety are false and are fake and are untrue.
Yeah.
The anxiety itself is very real. Those feelings are radically real.
Yeah.
So here's what I'd like to suggest. This is what I do, and this might sound silly, but whenever I feel my anxiety come up, I have a meditation practice that I go through. And this has come from years of counseling and spiritual direction that I've done with people in my life. And what I do is I identify my feelings that they're real. So as soon as I start getting my anxiety feelings, as soon as I possibly can, which sometimes is 30 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 1 second. And I take those feelings and I pretend that they go, for some reason, I think of it as a styrofoam cup. And I try to put them all in a cup. Okay. And I say, these are real. My fear is real. My anger is real. My frustration is real. And then I put that cup on a table. And then I imagine myself sitting with Jesus on a picnic table, looking at my feelings in a cup. And then I ask Jesus, what do you think about these feelings? Or how do we discuss these feelings that I'm having? And then I just try to listen. And I picture this. I try to, as vividly as I possibly can, I picture this in my head. I put those feelings in a cup. I put them on the table. Okay, I'm scared. Why am I scared? Jesus, like, what about me? He's like, I'm so sorry you feel scared. You don't need to feel like, and I just go through it, and I ask you, what do you feel about those feelings? So what's important about that is that we don't ignore the feelings. We must be confident to say those feelings are real. I feel that. It is real, and it's in that cup.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to put that cup aside, and then I'm going to ask Jesus, okay, what should I do with that? What about that? What do you think about those feelings? The problem with anxiety comes when we start assigning meaning to those feelings ourselves. If I look at that anger or that frustration or that fear, I'm probably going to say negative things about myself. I'm probably going to talk down on myself.
Yes.
So we need to truly identify what those feelings are, but not assign meaning to them. This practice takes time to cultivate. It's not something, the next time you face anxiety, and if you try to do that meditative practice, it might not work right away. Meditation and these types of things are things that happen over time, and things that you can practice to figure out.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I've practiced for a lot of years, so that when I feel my anxiety rising, and sometimes I don't identify it, sometimes I'm 30 minutes into a panic attack and I'm just like, shit, I'm just so messed up, right? And I can't even get there. Yeah. But when I can, I do that. That's one of my meditative practices.
Wow.
I think a couple other really important things is to breathe, and breathe. Take some deep breaths. When you feel your anxiety coming, slow it down. Just take some deep breaths.
Right.
Anxiety is often a game of momentum. So it starts going, and then you feed it, and that ball starts rolling more. And then it starts rolling more, and then it starts rolling more. So what you need to do is try to interrupt that. So whether that's a deep breath, whether that's pouring cold water on your face, whether that's interrupting it with a meditative practice.
Yeah.
If you keep feeding the beast, it's going to keep going. And we need to work to try and interrupt that to some degree. Yeah. So just breathe a little. And I'm not saying get really prayerful, like, because I know sometimes we use so much Jesus stuff, but like figure out a way to interrupt it, however that is. So whether that's, again, a meditative practice or something else, but the key is do not assign your value or your meaning to the feelings. Identify your feelings as reality. That's and good. Then try to find truth in the midst of those feelings.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think you could practice over time.
Yeah.
Lastly, though, develop a rule of life. A lot of times there's triggers to your anxiety. And so finding times to be silent, use prayer beads and say the Lord's Prayer, or find some more peaceful rhythms and do those every day. Finding healthy rhythms that can interrupt your anxiety triggers will also be very helpful. So if you have a rule of life, a set of specific things you do every day, every week, every hour, like however you choose to deploy that will also help you interrupt your anxiety the more it comes up. I say my whole family, we have we send a text every day at noon, and we all say the Lord's Prayer together at noon. My whole family does that. And so I even do it at Loyal. Like, little secret, I go to the bathroom at noon and say the Lord's Prayer all by myself in my little prayer stall. Like, and I've done that since I was at Ivy Wild. I've done that for years and years and years. Wow. So that's one part of our family's rule of life, that at noon, so even if at 11:45 I'm feeling that stress, at noon I'm going to interrupt it with the Lord's Prayer, and to some degree that will help slow down that momentum. Yeah. So it's like, some of those things, but
like helps you remember.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even last night, trying to preach and talk to and motivate a bunch of cameras.
Yeah.
It almost is more terrifying than just talking to 120 people.
Sure.
In person, because it's like, who's watching? Is anyone watching? It was so difficult for Brooke and I kind of to adjust to that. But last night Brooke and I were talking, and she was saying when she prayed, she did feel like a little more calm. It kind of helped her remember. That kind of reminds me of what you just said. Like, and I hope everyone who's listening to this or watches this or knows that Tyler and I we both believe that Jesus is the healer. He can do all things. There's nothing stopping him from healing anxiety. He is the answer for almost every question. But there's also this true reality that sometimes, even though you're really close to Jesus, you still suffer with anxiety,
100%.
Depression, all types of things. It's not like life is all perfect now, but we do have hope for the future, and so I love
here's the reality. I mean, bro, I've been going, like, since this pandemic started, I've been going to counseling every week, every Friday, like, because I've had to. So again, I so deeply believe Jesus is a healer, and yet I've had to put in extra work in this season to make it by.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, I've increased so many of these very practical practices. Yeah. I still pray a whole bunch. I still do this, but guess what? It's okay to have Jesus and a therapist too.